Thank you. As he said, I'm from NREL in the U.S., and today I'm going to talk about the operation of India's power system with high penetrations of renewable energy. So some of this is a little bit of overlap with what Dr. Cochran talked about yesterday in some of the sessions, but hopefully it provides some deeper insight into operations with these high levels of renewable energy. Also want to acknowledge that Ranjit and Jacqueline also did work toward this. So we had many partners on this, the Ministry of Power, USAID, as well as POSCO and Ranjit from Berkeley. Okay, so the objective is to understand how the India power system operates with high levels of renewable energy, and the methods help us look a little deeper into the states than we have in the past. And so this is actually a forthcoming report, volume 2 of the Greening Grid RE integration studies. And so I'm just going to go briefly over some of the results and the methods behind that and talk about the kind of philosophy behind looking at this high-level detailed system. So I apologize if you were in a session earlier where I showed this slide, but I just want to make sure I don't leave anybody behind. The way we look at the operations of the system is using a production cost model. This is used to simulate complete operations for the full year and every 15 minutes dispatch period within the year. So another name for it, security constrained unit commitment and economic dispatch. So we are looking for the least cost mix of generators needed to meet the load. And this is on a 15-minute basis, actually, so a little bit of a typo there. And the outputs we get are basically represented in the plot on the left. And this is the total generation that helps meet the load along the blue line. And so everything combined into that generation stack we also get out. So ramping requirements, transmission that was needed on the system, locational price that resulted in that generation mix, etc. So there's a lot of outputs that we can look at to understand how the system operated, not just the economics of meeting least cost. Okay, so some of you have probably seen this slide, but a big part of this whole study was looking at today's power system, trying to build a model of that and best represent how the system works today, then forecast to the future with our load and our demand, and of course our RE and figuring out where that goes, and then simulating the system in the future. We use a commercial production cost model. We use it quite often at NREL, and that is Plexos. The reason we use a commercial model is essentially because it does help give us credibility in the industry, and in this case we work closely with POSCO, and hopefully they can take this model forward and use it in the future. So you've already seen a version of this slide, but ultimately these models are very data intensive. We did a lot of modeling of the weather to make sure we captured all the variability of the wind and the solar on the system down to very small spatial granularity, as well as time variabilities that we wanted to capture. So the wind is captured at 5-minute variability, the solar at 1 hour, and there's everything else on the power system that we wanted to make sure we got as correct as possible. So we got unique properties for each generator that exist on the system today. We did DC power flow. That's kind of standard in production cost models at this point. And projected properties of new lines to 2022, and I'll get into that a little more. We also looked at transmission limits that would be needed for reliability and tried to best guess what those might be in the future running these models. Okay, so this is a little different than Jacqueline presented the other day, and the reason is that we wanted to look deeply at the regions of the country that will have a lot of RE. And the majority of RE, which probably all of you know since you've been here for 2 days now, will be installed in the western and southern regions, as well as Rajasthan in the northern region. And to understand the impacts in these certain regions, we wanted to put as much detail into these as we could. So we took the full planned and known transmission system in these regions and represented it with all the data that we had. And this included some simplifications. So we only looked at transmission down to the 400 kilovolt level. And we also wanted to only look at relevant lines. That has to do with computational intensity. And so we had to make some equivalency and simplifications. But still, we do include all of the lines in our model in these regions to help capture the power flows that might be happening in the area and make sure that certain lines are enforced if they need to be, and we see them actually overloading. And we don't want to do this in a silo. We wanted to represent the rest of the country as well. So as you can see, there are connections to the regions outside of the western and southern areas. The within-state transmission is not represented in those regions, but we still wanted to capture the generation and dispatch that might be changing within those regions without being too worried about the details that are happening within the state, and focusing our analysis just on these high detail regions. So before I get into the results, I just want to kind of take a second to think about the amount of detail that we put into the model and what we can actually pull from these models. So, in the national study, which is a report that was already out in June, we made some simplifications about the transmission system, and we have a lot of confidence in the numbers that came out of that, and the annual numbers and the annual impact that we can look at and how that might affect the central level operation of the system. When we look at more detail, you're certainly dealing with a lot of unknown variables, including transmission growth, RE siting, so not all 160 gigawatts of wind and solar is known where it's going to be on the system and how the transmission system is going to go around that. But that doesn't mean we can't get some insight into what might be happening at the state level and look for certain indicators, interactions between states that might teach us some lessons. So I just want to go through a couple examples of that. And what I have here are the dispatch for 4 states in the southern region. So Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Telangana. These are all expected to be high RE states in 2022. And the generation dispatch here, as you can see, has some curtailment within a couple of the states. So the causes of curtailment are extremely hard to identify as one single problem, but we can at least try and look further into that. So as we've all been talking about, thermal and hydro inflexibility is one. Starting and stopping costs, so kind of wrapped into the flexibility conversation, is that it costs potentially a lot for a thermal plant to start and stop. Transmission congestion could play a role, as well as trade barriers between states. If mechanisms aren't in place for states to trade RE, then there's potential for some RE getting wasted. And so I want to try and kind of pull out what might be happening at the state level to cause problems where we are getting curtailment. So here's just another layer of plots, and what this shows us is the total coal capacity on the system. Okay, so these are a little bit difficult to explain, so bear with me for a second. Okay, so along the black line here, what we see is representative of the total installed capacity for Andhra Pradesh in this single period. So this is just a single day. And in the gray is all of the coal capacity that is not on. So that is just off, not operating. And in the orange, what we have is all of the coal capacity that is on, that is at its minimum generation. And in this case, we chose 55%, which is a CERC regulation for central generating plants. And we've been told they expect to get that in 2022. So that's how we represented the system here. So when you see the gray plus the orange adding up to the black, what that means is all of the coal capacity within that state is essentially inflexible in the downward direction. So all of the orange can't move down anymore. It's at its min-gen, and there's nothing online to turn down any further. And you can see if you look at the dispatch stack, this is actually a very small capacity of coal that's still online. One other point about this is what you see in red here, and that means the coal plants are actually turning down as fast as they can. So they're at maximum ramp down. So that would also be considered to be a potentially inflexible state as well. And what we can learn from this is looking across all of these states, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, is that during high RE penetration periods, a lot of the coal within this southern region is inflexible. There's nothing else it can do. And so it's either going to have to move out of the southern region or get curtailed. And in the case of Tamil Nadu, we have a fair amount of curtailment here. And if you look at what's going on in Tamil Nadu during that period, is its coal plants are fully backed down. but its neighbor, Karnataka, is not fully backed down. And so that just gives us some insight into the fact that Tamil Nadu, in this case, is not able to fully access the flexibility from the other regions. And so that might give some indications of how planning should be taken up, where you're considering that RE integration is not just about looking at the flexibility or the transmission planning for optimal RE siting, but also how that RE is going to access the flexibility across the system. And for lack of a better way to represent transmission congestion, just wanted to offer the what's going on the interstate transmission system. So you see in Andhra Pradesh, you're also getting some frequent congestion, and you do see some curtailment. Karnataka is not really congested throughout this period. And so ultimately, what we're seeing is that Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, congestion in other areas is contributing to Karnataka's coal not being able to be accessed. Not necessarily Karnataka's own congestion in that case. Just to walk through another example, what is represented here are three different sensitivities that we ran, where we looked at the different coordination that could happen on the system. And if you move from left to right, you're moving toward more coordination. So in our leftmost scenario, this is a scenario I've been talking about. We call it our state level balancing scenario. And this is as close as we could get to how the system operates today. Mostly state level balancing. There's certainly trade across lines, but they're looking at their own system to help balance their own generation and load. In the middle is the EIM scenario. So that's essentially mimicking what's happening in the Western United States with the energy imbalance market. So how that works is all the states are looking at their own resources for commitment, and when they move past the day-ahead schedule into the real-time operation, they're allowed to see other chances for buying energy essentially on a real-time market in the 15-minute time frame. So they're allowed to buy energy within the day ahead, but they're only allowed to commit their own resources. As we move farther right to the regional coordination scenario, all commitment decisions are made essentially as a pool in the southern region. And you can see that from a dispatch stack perspective for Tamil Nadu, so this is just Tamil Nadu day in March, you can see that the overall commitment of generation, the overall generation across these scenarios drops as we move farther to the right. And you can see that a little clearer down in the bottom section here, where we move from state, where we have commitment with this gray line, and in the black line we have our day-ahead generation that was forecasted. In the purple line we have a real-time generation. As we move farther right to our EIM scenario, commitment stays the same. That's all they could see in their day-ahead schedule. Day-ahead generation stays the same, but when they moved to the real-time, they were actually able to displace some of that coal in the real-time for less expensive coal around the region. As we move its commitment and also drop its generation, essentially more like what we see in the state, where the real-time generation is closer to real-time, closer to day-ahead generation. And so if we look at what's happening at the states, and for the reason that Tamil Nadu was able to do that, we can actually pull that out of the relative marginal cost across the region. So these do affect coordination. If you see in the southern region, the average marginal cost dropped as we went to more coordination, and across the states, what we saw is it typically dropped. In Telangana, it dropped. Tamil Nadu, it dropped. In Andhra Pradesh, it actually went up. And the reason is that Andhra Pradesh has relatively low marginal variable cost, and during scenarios of more coordination, Andhra Pradesh was able to provide coal to the rest of the region and lower the overall cost of running the system this is actually annual numbers in this case. And AP did kind of this did manifest itself throughout the year for AP, helping to provide coal to the rest of the region. So as I said at the beginning, there's a lot of detail in these models, but I just wanted to point out two scenarios where we might be able to learn how states could work together in the future and how that actually might be affected by interstate transmission, even though we don't know everything that's going to be happening. So anybody who's a modeler knows that results are sensitive to assumptions, but particularly in this case, REs, there's a lot of RE going on the system, and it's not necessarily planned where transmission will go. So it's important to understand the implications for trying to make conclusions about that. And I'll just skip over the rest of these, but I just want to make the point that, essentially this is the first cut at answering some of these questions at the state level, and it's meant to be revised over time. This is not meant to say that RE integration is going to happen in this way, but certainly as we get more information, we can be more confident in the assumptions and build that into models like these so we can understand how operations will work in the future. So just a couple of conclusions about those two scenarios that we went through. So coal does play a significant role as a flexible resource, particularly from other states. As we saw with increased coordination, coal actually helped a lot with RE integration in the neighboring state, for example. Transmission constraints can get in the way of coal flexibility, relieving RE curtailment. And even given unknowns in the future, you can still gain some insightful state-level analysis. But certainly conclusions needed to be scaled to make sure that we're not overstepping what this actually means from an RE integration perspective. Thank you.
1 minute left. Any questions now? No?
Yeah.
At the end. Please.
Hi. I'm Ashish from ICF. I have one question on the slide where you show the prices, basically for different states. Under regional coordination level, why the prices for different states are different? I mean, should they not converge to one price?
This is essentially a simplified version of price where we are just taking the marginal unit within a state and looking at the most expensive marginal unit that is online within a state. So they wouldn't necessarily completely converge. There are still transmission constraints within the southern region, even though there's full coordination. So we're not ignoring transmission. We are just removing essentially economic trade barriers between those states. So they're coordinating more, still constraints on the system.
Okay, thank you.